evening, everybody. Welcome to Poultry Keepers 360. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the science behind poultry meat flavor. And Mandelyn Royal has joined us tonight, so we've got four of us going to tackle this. Three of us are going to sit back and wait while Mandelyn does the tackling, but we're going to have a good show tonight. So, coming up in just about 6 or 7 seconds, we're going to have fun. Have you ever wondered why heritage chicken tastes richer than fast-growing broilers? It kind of all comes down to muscle development, fat content, and diet. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So let's get started. Good to see the three of you guys here tonight. So, Mandelyn, where you want to go first?
Oh, you are going to put it on me.
well, I think a place that I'd like to start is breed selection and genetics.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to get started because my own start was so experimental until I hit on a bird that performed in a way that I wanted it to. But that whole beginning phase of making the transition from store-bought chicken to home-raised chicken, and I totally skipped the commercial hybrids because I knew if I could buy it at the store, am I going to put in that amount of effort if it's easy to get? So I immediately jumped into the heritage types and what was being called dual purpose and those birds because I didn't want to do exactly what I could just go buy. And I haven't actually raised a Cornish cross myself, so any information I have on how they are for the table, it's all based off of store-bought knowledge.
Well, I think that's what most people have is store-bought knowledge.
I mean, I will say that the store-bought Cornish and the feed it a very rich feed that Jeff created is different. It's a lot different. I had to do it, obviously, Mandy, for science. I had to try it. And I talked to Jeff and I was like, hey, broader ration, what you got? He said, get this. And I did. 6.5 weeks later, put some in the freezer. Several of them didn't make it to the freezer because they got cooked that night. And I could tell a big difference. Now, it's different than a heritage bird too. But the cool thing about it is when you raise it, you kind of get to marinate it all of its life.
That's true. Between what you're feeding, the type of forage they get onto, all those little parts and pieces of your management all affect the flavor profile they're ultimately going to end up with.
And, for our viewers out there tonight, drop us a comment and let us know what breed you raise for meat and what is your favorite breed for flavor. Let's see what you guys have to say about that.
Yeah, does chicken taste like chicken no matter the chicken?
No,
it doesn't.
There's the challenge that I want to put out. Okay. Raise you a Cornish cross, raise you your American breast, raise your Rhode Island red, whatever, right? Cook them all identically, right? And do
even if they're different ages.
Test. Okay, they have to hit their maturity weight, but let's say we're looking for a 5 pound across the board. Okay. So that way your breast is mature, the Rhode Island red is mature. Okay. But they have to be cooked identically and they have to be fed the exact same feed. And there's the challenge, right?
I don't think you can adequately do that.
I don't think so either because the texture changes with the age and that changes the cooking method. So if you take an 8-week-old Cornish cross and throw it in the oven for a bit at 400 degrees, and then you take a older, let's say past 20-week-old bird, it's going to do a lot better at 300 or 350, and that 400, it's not going to be as good of a result at that temperature that's suggested for Cornish cross.
And
Well,
we
see,
got
not
some
You
only-
can cook them. No, wait. All right. Wait. I meant the exact same seasoning. If you want to cook your if you want to cook your American breast or your Rhode Island red for 16 hours at 180 degrees, I don't care. The point being is what I was raised on is the flavor of any meat, okay, beef, chicken, you name it. The flavor is all in the fat, which comes directly from what it ate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, texture will be different. I'm not going to argue that, but the actual flavor, and we did a blind side-by-side cooking test, and actually, if you really want the trueness of flavor, you don't season it at all. You actually put it in a large pot on a rack, and you steam them. Okay. And when we lifted the lid on the steamed commercial raised Cornish cross versus the steamed pasture raised Cornish cross, you could smell the manure and the viscera it was horrible on that commercial bird. Okay. You take away all the seasoning and you just steam it. Holy crap. It was nasty.
That's interesting.
That does not sound good.
We've got some...
if you really want to know, if you steam them, right, even if you want to use salt and pepper and put some garlic in the water, it's fine. But as long as everything's identical, but you're going to get more aroma and you're going to get a truer flavor profile in a steamed bird situation. And I learned this from a chef where they did guinea fowl, white rocks, Cornish cross. They did a whole bunch of different birds, right? And they had like 10 guests there. Nobody knew what they were eating until afterwards, right? And they get scorecards and the whole bit. And it was pretty amazing.
Do you know did they wet pluck them with a scalder, or did they dry pluck everything?
As far as I know, everything was wet. Everything was wet plucked,
Because I wonder how many dips you can do through a scald water before the water might stick on the skin and affect flavor that way versus dry plucking where you don't have to worry about water cleanliness. Like, how many birds can you process through the same scald water before you should change the scald water?
Well, the scald water is constantly being refreshed because every time you put a bird in and take a bird out, you're losing a large amount of water. So they're constantly running a hose to refill it. You can do, like 100 birds without changing the water. It depends on the bird and how they were raised and how much manure is hanging on the outside of that bird. Now,
cleaner the better.
In the more modern scalders, they're set to an actual timer, right? It's like 45 seconds or 1 minute is all they get, right, at 140 degrees. And so you don't really get a whole lot of cooking. Now, homesteaders, backyarders who don't have that equipment, they're going to hand dunk, and their temperatures are not going to be perfect. Okay, right? So they're going to have a lot of temperature fluctuation. So I can see your point. You're going to actually start, cooking the skin at that point if it's not done correctly. Sorry, that's not what we're here for tonight.
No,
that's all important stuff. I'm just popping up some...
scald temperature is really, really important. Otherwise you can screw it up. Now, ducks are more like 145, but chickens are 138 to 140 for most chicken breeds. Now, I have heard doing like people that have taken old spent hens or retired hens, they'll run that at more like 142 to 145 because the feathers are more attached in that kind of a bird because it wasn't actually designed for meat and the feathers are harder. So I have heard that from some of my processing folks that they need a little more temperature.
Interesting. Excuse me. That's interesting. What about grow out time? What do you think on that, Mandelyn? How does that influence the taste?
It depends on the kind of growth rate that the bird has, which is going to depend on the breed, the bloodline, and whether it's a hybrid or not, because a lot of the hybrids, they grow a lot faster, especially if they're a Cornish cross. I mean, you can't get any more efficient growth than a Cornish cross. They're faster. And Red Rangers, stuff like that, they're slower, but still pretty speedy. And then after that, like 14-week point, the rest of them fall in wherever they're going to fall in. So I started out by weighing my birds live to get an idea of what that dress weight would be and handling them, and then processing them when they felt, nice and meaty. But some of them never did feel nice and meaty. And some of the breeds we tried. And all of that age ties in with the type of flavor they're going to have, because natural chickeny flavor doesn't even start to really develop until after 12 weeks. So if you've never eaten a chicken that's at that age, like if all you've ever known is Cornish cross before 10 weeks, there's a whole other world of flavor that you've never even tasted before that chicken can do. And then the age, even all the way up to 2-3-year-old stew hens, it's a completely different flavor than an 8-month-old pullet. It's a completely different flavor than a 5-month-old pullet, because as they age, their flavor just keeps on developing. And it changes their fat composition too, based on their age and gender and their diet. And that really goes a long way to what kind of flavor they're going to develop, how juicy they're going to be. It's pretty interesting, just a huge range that's out there. So you have to figure out what you like and then do that. It's a lot of options.
That makes sense, though, when you stop and think about it. I know we talked a little bit about breed and genetics. And somebody asked me just the other day, which did I prefer? And I've never tried a breast, okay, so I don't have that. Haven't tried that flavor yet, but I did raise some of Frank Reese's Barred Rocks and some of his New Hampshires.
Oh, how were they?
They were great. I liked them both, but the Barred Rock, I'd just give it a little bit of an edge over the New Hampshire. It was trying to figure out how to describe, a little bit richer and a little bit fuller taste than the New Hampshire, but both were good, not a problem at all. And they were processed at about 16 weeks.
And they were raised the same and fed the same?
Yeah.
Was it like a depth of flavor or like a mouthfeel kind of thing? Because once you start getting into the culinary stuff, the mouthfeel and the texture of the meat and the type and amount of fat that they had, that all affects the mouthfeel of it in those culinary chicken meals. Not just, I'm eating because I'm hungry and chicken was easy, but I mean like those culinary experiences of eating for the fun of it.
Well, sure. Mouthfeel, I think, on both of them was pretty close. But like I said, I just on flavor, I would give the edge to the Barred Rock. So, I mean, you can take that for what it's worth. Just my experiences and what I found over time. And we're going to be talking about intramuscular fat. And if you don't know what that looks like, there's not many photos around on intramuscular fat and chicken meat, but I was able to find some in a study that was done in China. Now, there's obviously two different things going on here. The column on the left where it says AA, those are Arbor Acres broilers, commercial broilers. The column on the the LS on the right is and I can't pronounce the name, I'm sorry, but it is a Chinese heritage breed. And you can see there's definitely some difference there. The one on the column on the right, it reminds me almost as much like marbling in beef or pork. So it's kind of, it looks about the same to me, but I just thought you'd be interested in seeing those pictures. We talked about feeding, their diet and their nutrition. And Mandelyn, I'm going to rely on you and Jeff here to maybe tag team this, but how does their diet affect the meat flavor and fat composition? I have heard that a diet rich in soybean and corn gives basically a little bit of a sweeter taste, and other things can give it a stronger umami flavors from grasses and insects and other things. But what's your thoughts on that?
I'll let Jeff go first. He knows more.
So a corn and soybean meal rib is actually going to give you kind of a denser meat. The fat level in that diet, like a commercial chicken feed that most people listening would go pick up at Tractor Supply, the fat levels, as we've talked about before, is only at that 3.5% range. Now, farmers that I've worked with for a long time, raising the Cornish cross, and using the roasted soybeans, which has full fat, that'll impart, actually, when you cook it, you can smell the peanutty flavor. You can get the nutty aroma out of that being cooked. So, like I said, my mentor, 29 years ago, he pretty much beat it into my head or drilled it into my head that the flavors in the fat. So the componentry going into the diet, most of that's going to transpose, a fair amount of that's going to come right over into the fat deposits of the chicken, right? And you're going to be able to, so for a sweeter bird, I actually prefer to use wheat because I'll get a whiter fat, a more translucent, soft white fat. And it dissolves, or it cooks down easier than the yellow fat and absorbs more easily into the muscle. So I feel you get a juicier bird and a sweeter bird. Actually, it's this easy, right? You've eaten cornbread, right? And you've also eaten white bread. Now, unsweetened cornbread, which you can find in the South, and just like a regular white bread, the wheat is going to be slightly sweeter than the corn, right? And that same thing happens in a chicken. Okay, so it's those things come straight, regardless of breed. Now, breeds digest things differently, and they deposit fat in different locations. And early in my career, I watched people when they were processing their chickens, regardless of whether it's heritage or otherwise. And Mandelyn, you've seen this, right? You open a bird up, and there's this fat deposit that we call the pad fat. It's basically at the end of the sternum or the keel. It's kind of right there in that abdomen opening. And I was watching people remove that and throw it away, and I'm like, "Are you an idiot or what?" I mean, you just threw all your flavor away, right? That's where your flavor's at, right? So, but yeah, Cornish cross, when you get much over that 4-pound mark carcass weight, then you start getting that large amount of pad fat, and people were afraid to sell it, and their customers were complaining about it. And I'm like, y'all are stupid. I mean, that's where your flavor's at right there, right? So, and if you cook a corn cross breast down, most of that fat will dissolve into the breast. And then for the last 20, 30 minutes, if you flip it over, and you can crisp up that skin under a broiler, and it makes a huge difference. But not everybody knows that. So,
Sometimes when I was doing the store-bought birds, the fat wouldn't melt all the way, and there would be globby, gristly deposits left, and I would never eat that. Like, what I would pick off for the dog bowl was a lot more generous than what I pick off for the dogs now. And I've noticed that within the American Breast breed, as I experimented with different genetic pools within the breed, the fat can vary. Even if they're in the same environment and getting the same feed, the genetic profile can vary within them. But I never did encounter that globby fat that just stuck and didn't melt down. So that was a relief, because it was like my least favorite thing to fry up some chicken, eat it, and get a bite of ickiness. Because I'm really weird about, like, I can't chew on beef fat. If I cook a steak, I take all that off. I can't. The mouth feels not right for me.
Yeah, I'm not a
So
huge
when it
fan.
comes
You were probably getting too big of a Cornish cross at the store. You were probably getting that 5-pounder or larger.
Yeah, I was
versus
getting the whole roast ones. I never bought the pieces.
Yeah.
I always got
No. What I meant is, if you bought one at the fryer stage, like 3 1/4 to 4 pounds, you don't have nearly the fat deposits. When you get one that's over 5, like a roaster, so it's that age thing that we were going to talk about tonight anyway. They just start piling on the fat when they get beyond 4.5 pound carcass weight, right? Or 6 pound live weight, and yeah, there's not a lot to do with that unless you had of course, I don't eat a chicken out of the store, so I haven't bought chicken at the store to consume in a long time, but I know what you're talking about, and it's an age thing there.
Oh, okay.
And the amount of fat that they deposit down in the thighs and in that pad fat.
Because I noticed on my older hens, that fat melts down like butter. People were telling me that they hate eating their old hens because the meat's stringy and it dries out. And I'm like, well, what did you do to that bird? What kind was it? Because that blows my mind. I'm like, there's a sweetness to the flavor of the older birds when they've got that fat in there and they had a nice, healthy lifestyle. Oh, man. Just add them with dumplings and off you go. Really good.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to chew an old sexling. They're just not.
I tried.
It
was terrible.
I mean, a sexling can, right now, in the dual purpose lineup, an old hen is different, but depending on what it was. And again, people try and cook it the same way they do a Cornish cross, and that don't work, right?
That doesn't work at all.
You got to lower the temperature.
There's differences in the birds, the breeds, in how the muscle fibers are put together, and there's different. I don't know the technical term, but I heard that there's long fiber and short fiber meats within poultry, and I think those tougher birds have that real long, stringy kind of texture if they were meant for laying and not for their bodies.
Yeah, never designed for dual purpose.
Yeah. What do you find to be the role? Okay. I'm going to ask you a question. Pasture raised or coop raised? Which do you prefer and why?
I prefer to run them on pasture all the way up until the day before processing, unless I do a special finishing. And if I'm going to do a special finishing, I do it for 4 weeks because 6 weeks was too long and 2 weeks was not enough. So if I'm going to do a special finishing, I start that 4 weeks before our harvest date. Otherwise, I'm putting them on pasture as soon as 6-7 weeks old and run them all the way up until the day before we're going to process. That flavor from being out in the wilds with the forage that they can find, it really puts on a whole other flavor profile than just building raised and grain fed. It's completely different. How that breaks down nutritionally and what we benefit from that, I'm not sure on the science behind all that, but I know it absolutely changes the flavor for the positive. It tastes real.
Now, those should be slightly less tender, right? The birds out running around should be slightly less tender.
Yeah, the texture is a little firmer, but your cook method can adapt to that, as well as if you do a brine soak, and depending on the type of brine you do, that or tenderizing, there's ways to adapt and overcome if they were on pasture all the way up until the end.
Well, their activity level is significantly higher if they're out there walking around. So they're actually walking off some of that, stored fat, that stored muscle fat, intermuscular fat. And, it's really the insects. I know people like to talk about grass, but in the life of a chicken, grass is minimal. It's more the insects that they're finding and, the other goodies as they're scratching around. So grass does something. I'm not going to say that it doesn't. But it's not a huge difference maker in flavor profiling.
Well, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but a chicken's ability to process grass and green peas like that, it's very, very different than cattle or hogs or something like that.
You're spot on, Rip. And they're not ruminants, right? So their desire for forage is, I'm not going to say it's less. Here's the thing is we don't manage our forage at the right height for a chicken. Okay. So pretty much once it gets past 6 inches tall, when it's a tender shoot, when it's young, tender grass, or you've just mowed the grass and it started to regrow, a chicken will consume considerably more of that because it's palatable and has better flavor. But when you put out there on old 12 inch or worse, grasses, they really don't have a lot of interest. And the fiber is so dense that they can't really break it down. And that's a good way to get, crop bound or, impacted crop. So grass really should never be more than roughly 6-7 inches for a chicken for them to utilize it. I'm saying you can put them out on any size grass you want, but if you want to maximize your grass input, it's going to be in that 6, 7, 8 inch range for a mature bird, shorter for chicks or younger developing birds.
Here's a question for our viewers. Have you noticed a difference in taste between pasture raised and grain fed birds? Let us know what your thoughts are on that, please.
I for sure noticed a difference because especially in the wintertime when I know the forage is terrible for them, I'll keep a little small batch in the barn in my grow pens, and they don't have outside access if it's, cold, no bugs, no grass, nothing to be had, but we eat chicken year round. So I'll still grow a small batch and process them in December, January. And that flavor of just pen raised, it's milder. There's a lot more fat because of the confinement. And the texture's the same because I'm still doing it at the same age. The only thing different is they were pen raised instead of forage raised. And it's slightly more mild in flavor with more fat because they didn't do much. But it's a completely different flavor profile of birds who were raised early in the spring versus over a hot summer when the bugs are higher but the grass is deader. It varies throughout the season.
Let's talk a little bit about processing age and its effect on flavor. I know commercial broilers are harvested 6, 7, 8 weeks of age. They're very tender, but they're also very mild flavored. Mandelyn, walk us through what you do with your breast and what you have. I know you've experimented for several years now, and
I'm still experimenting.
Well, but what did you learn about processing age as for flavor and for tenderness?
Well, before the breast, we were trying some other varieties, and with their growth rate and when they felt heavy enough for it to be worth it, it was 24, 28 weeks old, sometimes all the way to 8, 9 months old. And the flavor was definitely there. And the older the bird, the stronger the flavor, but the texture changes. As soon as those young males get their hormones in, it starts to change what their flavor is. And so as we experimented and I started backing it up earlier and earlier, I started to see that bi-week change of when they peak on their flavor, when they peak on their fat content, and how many options we have to cook them based on their age. So now, after going through all of those experiments, and I strongly encourage people to experiment, try it at all different ages, find your sweet spot for what you like for the birds that you're growing. And once you figure it out, just stick with what you know works or keep experimenting. But I prefer them to be between 14 and 18 weeks old for peak flavor without them firming up too much in the texture. Because after 20 weeks, that texture can change a lot on the males, especially. The females are still pretty good, though, because the females don't get that same hormonal bloom that the males do.
Mm-hmm.
So females, I don't really have a rigid timeline for them, but those males, I like to have them bagged up and ready to go by 18 weeks.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever tried or noticed a difference in a male that has only been in rooster coop versus one that has hung out with the ladies?
Yeah.
Because I'm curious if they have that hormonal taste.
Yes, they do. Like, that seems age-based no matter the lifestyle.
Okay. I was curious about it. I was wondering.
Well, because whenever I change my mind on a male, let's say I set him up into a pen with females, he gets to hang out with them.
Yeah.
And then I decide, you know what? I found a better one. I don't need you in the breeding pen anymore. So he
Right.
goes to the freezer. And the biggest difference is the age changing how I've got to cook them. So if they're like a year old, I'm definitely going to do a low and slow cooking method with some water involved to avoid drying them out excessively so that they have time to actually loosen up the fibers through cooking. And I'm talking like 250 degrees.
Well, let's take Carrie's question just a little bit further, because I don't think they would have the testosterone bloom if you separated the males and the females at a young age, and they were actually in a location where they can't see the females, right? They're not exposed to them. They were in a completely different growing environment. I wonder if they would still have that same testosterone bloom or flavor change at the same age. It's going to happen eventually regardless, but I think it would be delayed. And like Rip's talked about, also with lengthening daylight, that's also going to bring that testosterone level up. So
it would.
If you did so if you did a fall hatch, if you did a summer, late summer or fall hatch where the days are getting shorter, plus had them completely separated from the hens, then I think it could change that profile that you're describing, or that puberty bloom really. But in the most males in the absence of a female, that will be delayed. Okay.
See, now that's another science project.
There you go. Jeff, I appreciate you bringing that up, because as y'all were talking about this, I was having the very same question in my mind. You just beat me to bringing it up. So thank you. Hey, before we go any further, we need to say thank you. We would like to take a short break to express our appreciation to the Portrell Company for their sponsorship of the Poultry Keepers 360 Live programming. Portrell has been a trusted name in sustainable farming and poultry nutrition for decades, and their commitment to providing high-quality, natural products align perfectly with the values we hold dear in our poultry community. thank you for Trail for partnering with us to empower poultry keepers everywhere. We're truly grateful for your dedication and support. So, yes, we appreciate everything that you guys do for us, Jeff.
And we're happy to do it. So.
Just the nutritional knowledge alone completely changed everything I was doing.
I agree with that.
It made you more scary than before.
You made me a little smarter.
It was a difficult task to do that. It was a very difficult task to do that. So.
Well, like I was telling Rip before we started the show, I'm a little bullheaded, and I got it from both sides of my family. I've got a long, long history of bullheadedness.
I heard you when I was taking the dog out, so I heard you.
But once I find a good thing that works, man, you can't get it away from me.
We got a couple of questions here. Becca wants to know, has anyone tried a pasture-raised capon? I have not, to be honest with you.
I have on accident because the bird didn't develop the right traits to be a real rooster. I had probably about 2. Well, 3. I have one right now, actually. So that might be an experiment where they were clearly a male, but they never developed their maleness. And that's about as close to a capon as I've gotten. They just didn't turn out.
But nobody's tried. Do we know? Has anybody tried caponizing a breast?
I know people who have.
Because it's really a touchy. They make it sound easy, but it's actually there's an artery really close to the testes.
Yeah,
that you can lose one in a hurry, right? If you don't know what you're doing. Once you figure it out, it's not bad, but there is a pretty substantial artery near the testes, and if you grab the wrong thing, you got a dead bird.
But if you do gain the skill, it was really common because the whole point of that is to get those bigger growth rates out of birds, and you're able to grow them longer without that hormonal bloom. And that was the balance of getting that bigger size without the hormones, was by doing that.
It's hard to find anybody that knows how to caponize anymore.
Rip, you and I are the only 2 here old enough to know when you could order chicks that were caponized before the Cornish cross.
You could just buy them that way?
Yeah.
Right.
How old were they?
You could order caponized males for grow out, and that's pretty much back in just the White Rock day, back before we had the Cornish cross as we know it now. So you could order them already caponized.
Becca says he's curious to know if it would be worth the effort and the risk.
If you were getting a superior table bird into a premium market for a high price tag, yeah, it is.
I have a question.
It's definitely going to make it grow faster. So,
what's up, Kerry? What you got?
All right. So, science says that you can give poultry estrogen to make the males stop being fertile. So, would it be possible if you did that, and I guess chemically capone the bird?
I feel like I've heard of that.
It did not produce the testosterone to affect the flavor.
Mandy, I'm with you. I vaguely remember hearing something about that, but that's been.
I can't remember where, but I swear
long
I've heard of
ago.
it being done chemically.
I wonder if that would be kind of running afoul of the no hormones ever type thing. But
you would blow that out.
Point.
I mean, if you did that, you would blow that. You'd blow that way out the window, because you would definitely be doing that. But I wonder if it would work.
For science.
Speaking of for science, we got a question here from Stephanie Jones. Do you have any recommendations of anything that you can feed to improve the flavor on a 6-week-old Cornish cross? This is a poultry science experiment.
Can't think of anything other than age.
Nothing come. Jeff, what's your thoughts on it?
Anything that you can feed to improve the flavor, either peanuts or roasted soybeans. Okay. So if they're, peanuts, you can actually coarse roll some peanuts so they're big and chunky. Keep them, you could put them in a chopper, and so they're the same size as, the crumble or the feed that they're getting. But a couple weeks on peanuts, and roasted peanuts are probably going to have more flavor than just a regular peanut. But the quickest one is going to be peanuts because they're even higher in fat than a roasted soybean. So you can move the needle on flavor pretty quickly. I need at least 2 weeks, but they have to be able to start developing fat as well, right, to get that flavor profile. Peanuts would be my bet. Now, if you want an off flavor, just to prove the point, but you said to improve the flavor, so I would go with peanuts and say we can feed them a whole bunch of fish meal and make them taste fishy.
No, that's not.
Well, it depends on the judge, right? Maybe, if the judge likes fish, that could be the winner. So
I like anchovies, but
you're different, Rip. You are different.
Well, it's taken you all this time to figure that out. Come on now.
Nope, I've known it for a while.
Let's see, we got another one here.
Oh, look at Laura's comment too coming up.
Double Oz, yeah. That's small print. I can't read. I'm raising Delaware chicks and look forward to seeing how they will taste. I've heard they're pretty good.
I heard they're pretty good.
Yeah.
They'll taste like chicken.
Yeah.
No help. Let's see. Ingrid says the quality of the meat, ? People are already concerned about soybeans' estrogen content. If you were adding estrogen on purpose, would it be avoided by a large part of the market?
I bet it would be.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
Well, it would.
I ain't saying it's a great idea. I'm just curious if it would work.
Yeah. It probably would, but it'd be nice to find someone who still knows how to caponize and actually, get a video or somebody to talk to, with the dual purpose breeds of the listeners. I think it would be interesting, but I don't know if there's anybody left out there.
There are.
That,
They're out there. There's a private Facebook group that focuses only on that. And there's a couple of people within that group that actually teach it. There's still interest in it. It's just a small group of people willing to learn it and do it.
It would be, to me, I would find that interesting just to learn how to do it. Not that I would
definitely a skill.
Yeah. But I like learning new things.
I did a quick look, and it said that it's usually done between week 2 and week 4. So it's
I've heard some of the advice about it to practice on birds you've already unalived so that they don't suffer, and start at 8 weeks and then scale back through the ages as you gain competency, and to not even start on live bird. Yeah, and that made sense to me, but not enough for me to try it. I just process them 18 weeks or earlier and not worry about it.
Laura's got an interesting comment here. We were talking about chemical castration. She says chemical castration of a rooster involves injecting an agent such as not even going to try that, and luporin into a rooster. These drugs release chemicals into the bird that blocks production of hormones and render them infertile. So there you go, Carrie.
You can do it without estrogen.
Sue's comment is priceless. One word, bleh.
I mean, I just stick it in a crock pot and call it a day.
Well, and salt has a pretty good ability to remove extra gaminess or extra, like if you've harvested deer from the wild, a little salt comes in handy, and it can do that same thing with much older male birds too. Salt is a major, major component in the brine solutions too. So not only does it tenderize and start breaking stuff down to improve the texture, but it can also shift that flavor profile without making it come off as tasting salty, depending on the amount used. But
Stephanie Jones says, thank you. My daughter is taking 8 different chickens and experimenting with different feeds and environments and how it will affect the flavor. They will all then be butchered and cooked the same. Well, Stephanie, let us know how that turns out.
Yeah. I was going to say, I would love for her to document that.
Yeah.
And have her on here and tell us how it went.
Absolutely.
That would be awesome.
It would be.
Okay. All right, we've picked out our birds, we've raised them. Now let's talk about, and we processed. Let's talk about what to do post slaughter for processing and flavor optimization. I know, Mandelyn, you dry cure yours, don't you?
Sometimes.
It
depends, but the one thing I absolutely always do is I age them at least 4 days. Whether they're dry aged or in the shrink bag aging, I do at least 4 days, no matter how old they are, at refrigerator temps. Because I see a lot online where people say, oh yeah, we just put them in the ice water in the cooler and left them for 2 days, and then we bagged them and froze them. But ice water is too cold of a temperature to actually allow aging to take place, because ice water is right at 32 degrees. So it actually slows the process down. And those extended ice baths, if you use them, they're for Cornish cross, really, because they don't have the same aging needs because of how young they are. Because they are normally less than 10 weeks old, they don't have to age quite as long to still be tender. But once you start getting past 16 weeks, you really want to do at least 3 to 4 days of aging. And sometimes when you're doing a dry age, that means you've dry plucked it and that bird never got wet. Dry all the way through. And it helps to wrap them in a natural fiber, like linen, and age them up to 10 days. If you really want crispy skin, if you really want to go culinary. But at least 4 days makes a world of difference for the texture.
What about cooking methods? Mandy, take us through the difference in cooking a Cornish cross, if you can remember back that far, and a heritage bird.
Well, Cornish cross, with the tenderness that comes with the age, you can flash cook them. You can do high heat, short times. You can throw them onto the barbecue raw, and you'll still get a reasonable result so long as you didn't let it go too long and dry out, because they are susceptible to drying out and getting mushy if you've overcooked them. And that 160-degree doneness for poultry is for Cornish cross. That temperature for doneness is perfect for them. But in our breast flock, I'm actually looking for a doneness temperature of 180 in the thighs, because if it's less than that, the texture's firmer than I like. And then it depends on the age as well. So it really just depends on what you're working with And based on age, then you pick your cooking method. So you can't just take a year-old rooster and throw them in the oven at 400 degrees. You're going to hate it. But figure out what you have and figure out how to prepare it based on your options.
Elizabeth said her old birds seem to need to age a week.
You can go all the way up to 10 days, so long as that temperature's right for food storage.
She says, thank you, Mandy. She was doing it wrong.
A lot of people do. They put them in an ice bath for 24 hours, and then they cook them, and then they wonder why they're eating rubber.
Yeah, you don't worry about, okay, we're all been told raw poultry, bacteria issues, things like that. So, of course, you raised them, you processed them, right? You have more of that sanitation under control. But for everybody listening, you don't, have you done anything? Because I do know people, that do it similar to you, and they will, they'll wipe or wash the outside or the body cavity with something like maybe white vinegar, or I've heard of people using hydrogen peroxide, and it doesn't going to have a long-term flavor effect anyway, but just as a sanitation precaution, something like a white vinegar, just one more step of precaution.
Vinegar is also a tenderizer too.
Yeah.
That can be used for that. But I base my treatment of them based on the condition of the bird, because if your birds are coming out clean and they're not covered in filth and poo, you're already ahead on cleanliness. If you have a dirty bird, then that's where I get a little freaked out, because, they are what they're living in. And then as far as inside of the body cavity, it depends on how good my knife work was and if I nicked anything. But if it was a clean process, you get a clean bird. If it was a dirty process, you get a dirty bird. And then you just have to adapt. And
are you sanitizing it with anything? I hate to use the word sanitize. Are you doing anything as a precaution for any bacterial growth? Okay.
Not as a rule. Only
if you nick that gut and you didn't keep that all under control, would you?
That's when you would want to, yeah. Because anytime you have a leak, that's a problem in the making. And I like to compete with myself and show off on my processing skills. So I'll leave the crop in the front of the bird, but I'll pre-loosen it, and I'll tie off the tube that runs to the crop, and I'll tie a knot in that. And then when I open up the backside and I go in and I pre-loosen, I swipe my hand throughout the inside, wearing a glove for sanitation reasons. And then I'll get a hold of that gizzard and firmly pull it and get the crop out from the back end with it, all one piece. But if I pull too hard and it breaks, then I have to go through and clean out that bird real good because it broke. But no breakage, no problem.
Yeah. I mean, the crop, if you did it right, the crop should be empty anyway, right? There shouldn't be anything in it.
So right. You always want to take them off their feed 24 hours. You want to provide water, but pull them off the feed so that whatever's in their system has time to work out before you process. But you ever have one of those days when you walk outside and you go, man, it's a great day to process some birds. And then you go do that.
Very good. I can't say I've had that feeling, so I'm good.
I get that feeling sometimes, and then I have to struggle and berate myself for doing it that way. But, if the mood strikes, go ahead and empty a pen.
It's that sort of strike while the iron is hot type thing.
Or the knife is sharp.
Mm-hmm. If any of our listeners, before we're getting now close to the end of our show, but if you have some questions about this or any other topic, if you want to ask those, we'll do our very, very best to answer them for you, just to let you know. Mandy, while we're on the cooking comment. We kind of touched on it very, very lightly, but how do you like to season? What seasonings do you like to use on your birds when you cook them?
My go-to all-time favorite is salt, pepper, lemon juice, garlic. That's it. If I'm feeling fancy, I'll put celery and fresh herbs in the cavity with a lemon that's been quartered. But that's only if I'm feeling fancy. Otherwise, salt, pepper at minimum usually. Sometimes blank, because sometimes I'll cook 3 or 4 chickens at a time just to get the shredded meat so I can season it later. And I can do a taco chicken and a curry chicken and pick a flavor later if I did a bulk cook. But if I'm doing a whole bird, simple and mild without overdoing it. Because what I see some people doing to those Cornish cross chickens just to get flavor in there is they're just dousing it. They're taking a stick of butter and putting it up into the skin. Because you can season a bird from the inside by separating the skin from the meat and jamming that full of herbs or seasoning or butter. But on a nice flavored bird, you don't want that much. Just a little suggestion of flavor. But if your bird doesn't have that much flavor because it's very young or store-bought and it needs help, then you can over-season. But if your bird already has its own flavor, you just want to influence it. You don't want to cover it up and drown it, if that makes sense.
No, it does, because I was going to say one thing that I remember is in cooking a heritage bird versus a Cornish cross. It was like I would need to use more flavoring of some sort to get some flavor into the Cornish cross bird, where the heritage bird, it was kind of pretty much salt and pepper and just let the flavor of that bird shine through stand on its own.
Lemon juice does complement that chicken flavor pretty good, though.
Okay, I had not tried that, but what about brining? When you brine your birds, what do you put in your brine?
It depends. So if I'm going for tenderizing more than anything, I'll do a 24-hour brine soak, and that'll just be water, milk, and salt. If I'm looking for a seasoning brine, then, I grab 6 to 10 bottles of this or that spice and totally change the flavor. And the longer you have them in the brine solution, and then especially depending on the type of salt that you use, like for example, table salt is going to lead to the fastest, saltiest result. But if you use that coarser kosher salt, it doesn't pick up saltiness as quickly as with a table salt. And then the other types of salt, I haven't really experimented much with them. But I know over salting is easy if it was the real fine table salt.
I will say that I found some smoked kosher salt at the farmer's market one day, and that was pretty tasty stuff. But yeah, I know what you mean. That the regular table salt just gets it too salty too fast.
Yeah, if you use regular table salt, I don't think you need to brine any more than 2 hours, 4 hours max. 24 hours, you'll open that thing up and end up with salted chicken. Don't even have to refrigerate it anymore.
Okay, maybe not.
Yeah, that's a bit much.
Yeah, careful with the table salt because it can go too salty in a hurry.
Well, we're right down here to the wire here. So if you've enjoyed our show, we appreciate it, and we thank you for commenting and sharing with us. And if you have enjoyed our show, we'd appreciate it if you let other people know about the Poultry Keepers 360 live streams. We learn a lot. We have a good time. So just invite them over to sit in on the show sometime. Our next Poultry Keepers 360 live topic, Carrie and I are going to be exploring types of feeders, and feeding. it's not a one size fits all for all of those. So that's going to be a fun show. So that will be 2 weeks? 2 weeks from today. So
Yep.
It'll be what, Carrie, the 20th? I don't have my calendar open here.
Yes, sir. The 20th.
Oh, very good. I can still add. I'm fortunate. Well,
hey, that's important.
Thanks everybody for participating tonight, and thank you, Jeff, Mandelyn, and Carrie, for being here and contributing. As always, it's a real treat to work with you guys every couple of weeks. I hate to say it, but I kind of wish we could do it more often because I really enjoy the camaraderie. So you folks have a really good evening, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
So everyone, have a good evening. So long. We'll catch you later.